Hello, everyone, and welcome to Liberty Starship, where we take you beyond the typical terrestrial politics. Join us on the journey. My name is Eric, and this is my co-host, Pete. And as always, we're going to go ahead and get right into it. We're going to go right into our daily distractions, which honestly, Peter, that might take a different meaning now in the age of Corona. Daily distractions was always kind of meant to be sort of our satire of all the kind of stupid news out there and the misleading headlines, but people might be looking for distractions today.
Yeah, that's right. There's not a lot of fluff on the news. Everything is Corona, 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 and it's mostly hard news. So, um, I guess it just tells you that the media is hungry to fill the 24-hour news cycle. And now that there's finally something happened that justifies it, they are taking full advantage. So don't let this
That's
crisis go to
true.
waste. Yeah.
That's true. Did you want to go ahead and start out with your first article?
Sure. There's a very important story I wanted to share. Let me bring up the tab. Last week, we warned you about the dangers of putting monkeys out of work. You might recall that monkeys in Thailand were orphan monkeys were being forced to tend bar. Well, we now see what happens when they're unemployed. Yeah, they turn to crime. There are starving monkey gangs in Puri, Thailand right now.
Holy
As
cow.
yeah, what's happened, and I joke, but it's kind of true. What You don't have as many tourists, and these monkeys are called crab-eating monkeys. So ostensibly, they eat crab in a state of nature, but with all the tourists, they eat a lot of French fries and whatever else the tourists drop. Now the tourists are gone. There's not as much food for the monkeys, and so they are fighting each other in the streets of Puri or Lopburi. Absolutely unbelievable. So it looks a bit like downtown Chandler on Friday, but yeah, everything is
Maybe
abandoned.
not so much now, right? Maybe not so
Right now
much
that
now.
everything's abandoned because of the coronavirus. Oh goodness. The city even hosts an annual monkey buffet festival. So they are serious about it. Absolutely unbelievable.
So we've got a monkey theme going 2 weeks in a row now.
2 weeks in a row. We'll see how long we can keep it going. People need to know the truth about this important topic: monkey rights, monkey civil liberties.
I'm
They
curious.
don't
So,
have a
so
right
what
to
are they?
live.
What are they saying they're going to do about this? 'Cause I assume this is a problem for them. So
I assume it is because it's Southeast Asia. There's probably not a lot they are going to be able to do about it. Um, Generally, the religious sentiment, if you have a Hindu population, is that you don't force the monkeys to leave. You don't kill them. The most you can do is maybe bring larger monkeys into the vicinity, and that's how you would try to solve the problem. But um, basically, I think they are stuck with the monkeys for the foreseeable future.
stuck with the monkeys. Now
Yeah,
let's hope they're not spreading corona around, huh?
I have to imagine they are. I don't know if monkeys. I mean, they're closely related to us. If we can get diseases from dogs and cats, I have to imagine that monkeys can spread disease too. And I know they spread other diseases, so it could be a real problem for the city. Yeah,
Well, that's just crazy.
yeah. What was your daily distraction?
All right, so I've got two this time. I'll start out with this one. Let me get the share screen going here.
Yep.
Just 1 second, everybody, for our technical issues here. And we don't have a producer, so I'm basically have to run everything. So let's start with this one. Again, like I said, everything's going to seem to be Corona related, but it's still funny and it's still somewhat of a distraction. So, Emergen-C, which is a cold remedy, responds to boozy Quarantini with vitamin C. Quote, we do not recommend. This is a Fox News article.
What is a quarantini?
Well, we're going to get right to it. So I actually saw this when this was happening. This Marilyn Starkloff, who, by the way, I did click on her link when this happened. I saw this when she posted it, within minutes of her posting it. She's actually listed as a pediatric nurse, interestingly enough. But anyway, she said, time for a quarantini. And here you can see what a quarantini is. It is, I assume gin with the Emergen-C vitamin C supplement.
Oh yeah, aviation American gin. It says.
Yep, and mixed with Emergen-C, 1,000 milligram vitamin C. And I actually thought this was pretty clever, and it gave me a good chuckle. But apparently, Emergen-C is not laughing. They don't like it. Says on Twitter, a woman shared an image of her quarantini-inspired drink, mixing gin and Emergen-C. Unfortunately, the makers of the powdered vitamin supplement don't think it's a good idea. I don't see why not.
We do not recommend taking any of our products with alcohol. What a bunch of killjoys!
Exactly.
I'm allergic to gin, so I think it's a good idea. No quarantinis.
No quarantinis.
Maybe they can do sort of a quarantine old-fashioned or something. Just add that.
I like that. Yeah, quarantine old-fashioned. Doesn't have the same ring to it, though, as a quarantini. I think that was actually rather clever.
Yeah. Well, anything in a martini glass is a martini now, so I suppose we can get creative.
They said they added, though, quote, if you're feeling fine and of legal drinking age, a little extra vitamin C consumption doesn't hurt. So they kind of tried to have it both ways. So they definitely tried to have it both ways. I will say this. I am going to be talking seriously about Corona in my segment later, but I will say this: vitamin C in general doesn't hurt you if you quote unquote take too much, because it doesn't really build up in the body. There are some studies that say that it can cause things like kidney stones and things like that. But in all seriousness, what a lot of people are talking about with Corona is actually vitamin D. The vitamin D is helpful because vitamin D is helpful for respiratory infections. But vitamin D does build up in the body. So don't be going out there and chucking a bunch of vitamin D. Whereas vitamin C has very minimal cumulative effects on the body. Like I said, I guess there are some studies that say it causes kidney stones. But in general, more vitamin C doesn't really hurt you. Vitamin D will. So you got to be careful with vitamin D. But vitamin D is actually something they're looking at as far as something that does have benefits. And it would have been nice if they put something like that in this article. But they didn't, and that's why this is a daily distriction.
I see. So vitamin D is the one you get from sunlight, right?
Correct. So and also people, should be aware that lighter skinned people have an advantage because they actually produce vitamin D better than people with darker skin. In fact, there's a theory. Yeah, there's a theory that is the reason that people that generally live up north have white skin, that it was an adaptation because they had less sunlight. They needed to produce vitamin D in better quantities and more efficiently. That's the adaptive change because the theory, of course, is that humanity started in Africa, and migrated outward. So yeah, it's an interesting theory, and it makes a lot of sense actually when you think about it, because like I said, lighter skinned people do produce vitamin D better than darker skinned people. But again, as I mentioned, it would have been nice if they mentioned something like this in this article, because it would be a good education moment, if you will. And no such mention. They just kind of go with a little joke and all that, and have their little tongue in cheek and back and forth with this little post that someone did. But quite frankly, I don't think that there's any harm in this. I'll say that. If you are a drinker, might as well throw some vitamin C into your drink.
Does the alcohol in any way counteract the effects of the vitamin C?
Well, they do say that alcohol impairs your immune system. In all seriousness, that they do say that alcohol impairs your immune system. But a drink or two, I don't think is going to hurt you. I'm not a doctor. I don't claim to be. I don't even claim to play one on TV. But I will say that everything I've heard is said that yes, consumption of alcohol can absolutely impair your immune system. But I don't think having a drink. And let's be honest, people are going to drink. So if you're going to drink, why not put some vitamin C in it? So people are not going to stop drinking. In fact, some people are probably going to drink a little bit more than they normally do. Oh, we do have a comment, and let's share it here. This is from Janet R. Hanelman. I'm sorry, Janet, if I butchered your last name. And this is from the Facebook. It says, just lighten up, folks. Unknot your knickers. Janet, I agree with you. Although I do think that they had some fun with it, with the Emergen-C company. They had some fun with it and mentioned, hey, yeah, having some vitamin C with your alcohol is not necessarily a bad thing. So,
all right. Are we ready to find out what happened with Joe Biden today?
Yeah, let's get into it.
So we have found the one person who watched the Biden-Sanders debate, and that is this poor debate coach.
The one person.
Yeah. Biden had his best night to date. Nobody cared. There have been so many debates. They've been so long. It's too bad because probably this was, I bet it was a substantive debate compared to everything else that's come before it. The guy who wrote this article is Todd Graham. Apparently, he is a debate coach. I don't know that matters so much, but according to him, I haven't seen it. You didn't see the debate. All we know is what we've read, and Joe Biden wants us to call out the army to build more hospital beds to respond to coronavirus.
There we go. Yeah. Martial law, folks.
Well, I don't know. But don't we have the Corps of Engineers respond to natural disasters? There are worse ideas. If we're going to have the military doing something in a time of crisis, whether it's putting sandbags on a riverbank or, in this case, building hospital beds. We were talking off the air before the show about how Carl Icahn is shorting commercial real estate. I wonder if part of the solution, now that everybody's working from home, might be to put some of these beds into commercial buildings that are unoccupied. But
that's actually a great idea. I think that's a great idea. Yeah.
I hope something like that happens because we only have about 45,000 beds. We need a lot more. We may need a lot more. We don't know yet.
Well, one thing I thought about along those lines, and first of all, with the commercial thing, I live in the Phoenix metro area. Anybody who's familiar with this area knows that Mesa constitutes a lot of the east side of the city. And there's a defunct mall in Mesa called Fiesta Mall. That would be a perfect place when you talk about some place to just kind of put people or make a makeshift hospital because it's huge. It's a mall. And then along those lines, everybody has been talking about the lack of sports and there's no sporting anymore. Well, we can use those arenas for that purpose as well. That's another idea.
Yeah, we might have to get creative here because I think the Fiesta Mall is a great example. Mesa, we have so many businesses that have just closed down. The buildings are doing nothing. We do have a shortage of housing. It's time for us to find new use for that real estate. But anyway, back to the debate. His response on Bernie Sanders, he gave him a D. He gave Bernie a B. Said that Sanders had more questions than answers. As a socialist, I kind of think that's always the case. When do socialists really have any answers? They like to criticize capitalism. They say that they want to come to some solution, but it's always the same old when we're talking, the Bernie Sanders types.
I had heard that Sanders was emphasizing the Medicare for all, that's his answer to Corona. Like he doesn't quite understand the capacity issue, and I think that's why he's getting some criticism. The capacity issue is pretty straightforward, and it has to do with just simple numbers. When you talk about the number of people infected and then the percentage of people that can get seriously ill, what we're really talking about is oxygen and ventilators. So it's a capacity issue. It's not really an access issue. That's not really what we're talking about right now. And that's not going to be the problem going forward. And I did hear that criticism that Bernie Sanders basically said, hey, if we had Medicare for all, this Corona thing would be fine. That's just paraphrasing. I didn't see the actual quote. I saw someone commenting about it. And it's like, well, that's not really what the problem is. The problem is not the access issue. The problem is capacity. I don't think a Medicare for all quote unquote solution is in fact a solution, because that's not necessarily going to increase capacity. In fact, I think it might lessen capacity. A situation
Absolutely.
like that. I think that we probably have more ventilators than a lot of the. Well, I know in terms of raw numbers, we have many more ventilators in most of these other countries, even Italy, even Western democracies. We have many more ventilators than they do. Now, percentage-wise, I don't know if we're really up to par, because our population is also much larger. But we do have more ventilators than, say, Italy. So I know that.
But if you have Medicare for all, you cap spending just by necessity. They pick a number, and that's how much we're going to spend on healthcare this year. And after that, it's just a matter of triage and rationing.
Yes, exactly. No, that's absolutely true. Absolutely true.
All right. Do you have one more story?
I do. Now, this one I just thought was clickbait for me. I took the bait. The way that you might think I did. You can see that this is another Fox News article. It says, Dr. Oz reveals do-it-yourself coronavirus vaccine. It's that powerful. And I will admit completely, and this was published yesterday, I took the bait. I looked at this. I was all like, okay, Dr. Oz I kind of take with a grain of salt, because he is both a doctor and he plays one on TV. So I take him with a grain of salt. And I was like, okay, well, what
New Age and
alternative
medicine. He's known for a lot of New Age and alternative medicine, a lot of questionable advice.
So yeah, I take him with a grain of salt, but I myself fell for this, I fell for it the way they wanted me to. I was like, okay, well, I don't really trust Dr. Oz, but maybe he's going to give some good advice. Maybe, I know he talks to people talk to him, but here it is. So it says, while a vaccine to combat the spread of the coronavirus remains months away from approval, taking the proper precautions at home can reduce virus transmission by nearly 50%, according to Dr. Oz. So what's this 50% answer? So he was on Fox and Friends Sunday, answered many questions surrounding the novel outbreak, emphasizing the importance of hand washing and social distancing, after reports on Sunday estimated the number of infected cases in the U.S. surged nearly 3,000 nationwide, up from less than 500 cases recorded in the country at the start of the week. And what's his answer? Washing your hands alone is probably a 50% reduction in virus transmission, Oz said. It's a do-it-yourself vaccine. It's that powerful. That's the best way to stay out of it. But he emphasized the most important thing is social distancing. So I fell for the clickbait. At least there was a good message there. That is what is being emphasized: hand washing and social distance as being your friends. But I definitely I totally fell for the clickbait completely.
So he's not encouraging you to manufacture your own vaccines at home.
No, he's not.
Okay.
Nor is he. What I kind of thought was going to happen was it was going to be like some sort of kind of almost like a home remedy, or maybe he would even kind of explain how you can make. Because I've actually seen some posts where people talk about how you can make your own hand sanitizer. Because obviously, hand sanitizer is going out the door in most shopping centers now, and all that kind of stuff, and people having trouble finding it. But yeah, so anyway, it was clickbait, but I mean, at least it's not a terrible message. At least they are giving some practical advice. It's the same advice you're hearing everywhere else, but I guess they were trying to be clever and get you to click on the article, and it worked. It worked for me.
Yeah.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Speaking of sanitizer hoarding, did you see those in Tennessee who bought 17,000 bottles of hand sanitizer in order to resell them on Amazon?
I did see that, and that they got banned and they can't sell anything. So they're thinking they might just go ahead and donate it.
Yeah, they're donating it to a church. The state attorney general sent them a cease and desist order, so they're not allowed to gouge people for hand sanitizer, which I guess it's good that it's available, but this is one of those things where there's an opportunity for something good to happen. We could have more hand sanitizer if people were paying more for it. It would production. but people are gouging, I guess, and to a certain degree, I understand, but to a large degree, I'm just by the wrong-headedness
Well,
of that kind of
I don't
policy.
have any problem with Amazon or eBay saying you can't do this. We're not going to allow you to do this on their platform. I don't have any problem with that. In fact, I fully encourage that. My
Yeah,
line is pretty simple. It's when you have government intervention, that's where things become questionable. And that's actually what my segment's going to be a lot about. But yeah, I don't have any problem with Amazon saying you're a jerk, because I would say to him personally, you're a jerk. I would. If it was me, my personal opinion. But just because I have a personal opinion doesn't mean that I believe I should be able to legislate, you know what I mean, or that I believe that that the police should arrest this man for buying too
mhm.
much hand sanitizer. See what I'm saying? That's the line for
Right,
me.
and they do have to protect their brand. If they're seen as the place where you get gouged for goods, that hurts Amazon. So I suppose I can see their point.
Yeah,
Well, what is
I
your main
think,
story?
I just want to make that point that from a liberty perspective, I don't think there's anything wrong with a private company saying what can and can't be sold and under what conditions, and saying we're not going to be a part of this. They have every right to do that. Every right.
Well, what is your main story? You mentioned that it's about coronavirus.
Yeah, I'm kind of sticking with the same. I'm gonna beat this horse until it's dead, and quite frankly, I don't think it's going to be dead for a long time. And quite frankly, I do not see a lot of people talking about this. I see a lot of people talking about Corona. I see people
Okay.
talking about Corona like crazy, but I don't see people really getting into the liberty aspect. The coronavirus versus liberty. And we have some big stories that have happened in the last week since we were on the air. Some stories that I think are quite frankly frightening. And I'm not trying to be a fear monger, or what people are calling it, fear porn. I'm not trying to do fear porn. What I am trying to do is say, take a moment, step back. What are these people doing? Is this a good idea? Is it legal? Is it constitutional? And is it practical? Those are the questions that we're not asking. Is this practical? Can we really do this? When we first started this show, I started talking about this topic right off the bat. And one of the points I tried to make, and one of the ironies I tried to point out, is that China was in a unique position to do what they did. And the reason they're in a unique position is because they have both will and capacity. And what do I mean when I say will and capacity? Well, capacity has to do with their wealth. China is one of the largest economies in the world. By some estimates, it's actually larger than the United States, depending on which metric you use. But it's certainly a rival to the United States in terms of the raw size of their economy. Per capita, it's not anywhere near us, but it is as far as just as an economy by itself, it is huge. Only rivaled by the United States. So they are a wealthy country. So they have capacity. They have the ability to buy things, and not to mention everything's made in China. So they have capacity in that issue, very unique to the rest of the world, because they are the world's manufacturing plant right now. So they have that unique position of capacity, meaning they have all that wealth. Now,
Mhm.
when I talk about will, and this is very important in the discussions of liberty and to be real and to be realistic, they are a communist country, and they are a despotism. They are an oligarchy. Everybody doesn't get to join the Communist Party. It is an elite group of people, and
Mhm.
they are a despotic regime. There are not free elections in China. In fact,
Right.
one thing that before this show even started, I would have liked to point out is, very quietly, I think about a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years now, the president of China removed the term limits, because there had been term limits in China, and he quietly removed them to show that, yes, we are headed towards more of a despotism in China. And nobody commented about that, by the way. Nobody cared. But because of that, the irony is that they are able to do things that no other nation, I think, on earth can do, because they don't necessarily have both. There are other nations that have the will. They're despotic. They're tyrannical. They are not free societies, but they don't have the wealth that China has, and they don't have the manufacturing. They don't have all the capacity that they have. They don't have the military and the police forces, and quite frankly, the Communist Party mechanism, because they did implement the Communist Party mechanism in order to enforce these checkpoints. I talked about this before. Basically, what they were doing was the scenario was if you walk out of your apartment building, the local party boss was standing outside. He would check your temperature. You would have probably at least one checkpoint with the police, and then you'd have another checkpoint at the grocery store, and then you'd have to go through it all again. So you'd be checked 6 times. And if anywhere on that chain you tested, you had a temperature, they grabbed you and they quarantined you. Nobody else could do that. Nobody else could do that. And there are definitely liberty implications there, and it kind of goes to who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, and all that kind of stuff. Do we really believe in freedom? We say live free or die. We say freedom isn't free. We use those platitudes all the time. Do we really believe them? And right now you're kind of seeing maybe we don't. Maybe we don't, because I wanted to bring up the text of the LA order, because
this is LA Mayor Eric Garcetti.
Yes. And I've got to find the article. I apologize. I had it set up. I had it set up before, but
while you're finding the gist of it is he is closing down bars and restaurants. Is that right?
That is correct. Among other things. Among other things. That's not all of it. And I do want to mention, as we're talking right now, this is also happening in San Francisco, and I couldn't find the text of that order. But San Francisco, as I understand it, is taking it a step further, where they're actually imposing like a curfew. There's also places in New Jersey where they're starting to impose curfews from 8 to 5. Now, this is something that was done in Italy. So I would advise people, go and get as much information on what's happening in Italy, because they are copying Italy. They're copying the Italian model, because Italy is a quote unquote democracy. They're trying to see if what they're doing there can be done here. So now, the reason I bring up the city of Los Angeles, and the reason I wanted to bring up the actual text, is, first of all, it's everybody else is just going to tell you what he said instead of actually showing you what he said and show you what the quote unquote legal language is. Although my question is this legal? I think that's a valid question. Is this legal? Does this go beyond the authority that he has? But the point is, he's doing it regardless. So this is the city of Los Angeles. This is a public order under City of Los Angeles Emergen-C Authority. This was issued March 15th, 2020. Subject is new city measures to address COVID-19. It says, on March 4th, 2020, I declared a local emergency in relation to the arrival of COVID-19 virus in our community. And on March 12th, 2020, I ordered a number of measures to be taken across the city to protect members of the public and city workers from undue risk of contracting the COVID-19 virus. Our precautions over the past weeks and what we do over the next few days and weeks will determine how we will weather this emergency. They try to provide you with a little bit of context. They cite the Centers for Disease Control, which a lot of governors and mayors are doing that. I want to point out, I actually like what the Center for Disease Control is doing, because all they're doing is providing advice. They are not using the weight of law. And that, to me, is fine. And I don't have a problem with this, with the Centers for Disease Control recommending that you not have gatherings over 10 people and putting that information out there. What I have a problem with is who gets to decide that. And when governors and mayors decide they're going to give it the rule of law. So it says here in the city of Los Angeles, we must redouble our efforts to maintain hand hygiene, respiratory etiquette, and social distancing. It is absolutely critical that we as a city do everything we can to slow the pace of community spread and avoid unnecessary strain on our medical system. To aid in our efforts, under the emergency authorities vested in my office under the laws of the city of Los Angeles, that's interesting that he's using the laws of the city of Los Angeles, which are city ordinances. That's like the lowest level of law, basically. Today, I am ordering that a series of temporary restrictions be placed on certain establishments throughout our city in which large numbers of people tend to gather and remain in close proximity. By virtue of authority vested in me as mayor of the city of Los Angeles, pursuant to the provisions of the Los Angeles Administrative Code, Chapter 3, Section 8.29, to promulgate, issue, and enforce rules, regulation, orders, and directives, I hereby declare the following orders to be necessary for the protection of life and property, and hereby order, effective at 11:59 p.m. tonight until March 31st, 2020 at 12 p.m. that. Okay. Number one, There's four things. Now I'll let you comment, Peter. All bars and nightclubs in the city of Los Angeles do not serve food shall be closed to the public. Number two, any bars or nightclubs in the city of Los Angeles that serve food may remain open only for the purposes of continuing to prepare and offer food to customers via delivery, service, or to be picked up. Dine-in food service is prohibited. Number three, all restaurants and retail food facilities in the city of Los Angeles shall be prohibited from serving food for consumption on premises. Restaurants and retail food facilities may continue to operate for purposes of preparing and offering food to customers via delivery service, to be picked up, or for drive-through. For those establishments offering food pickup options, proprietors are directed to establish social distancing practices for those patrons in the queue for pickup. The following are exempt: cafeterias, commissaries, and restaurants located within hospitals, nursing homes, and similar facilities, grocery stores, pharmacies, food banks, Los Angeles World Airport's concessionaries. That's interesting. So you can still go out to eat at the airport if you'd like. Trucks and other vehicles engaged in delivery. Here's an irrelevant one. All movie theaters, live performance venues, bowling alleys, arcades shall be closed. All gyms and fitness centers shall be closed. And then the punishment, any violation, is a misdemeanor with fines not to exceed $1,000. It does say each individual officer should use their discretion in enforcing this order and always keep the intent of the order in mind.
Okay. So first of all, you mentioned that this is a city ordinance, that it's the lowest level of law, and that's partly true. But Arizona, like California, is a home rule state. We both have the Dillion Rule, which means that cities have a lot of autonomy. They are able to operate, for the most part, free of state interference. Now, in Arizona, we've seen examples where the state government has come down on cities to prevent them from passing laws that they find to be overreaching, like the plastic bag bans. You cannot have a plastic bag ban in Arizona because of Warren Peterson. But I'm going to assume that this will go into effect. I hear that New York has a similar policy, that they are not allowing people to get they're not allowing people to eat in restaurants. We're also, you can just imagine the amount of difficulty this is going to cause, because you have these sports teams in Los Angeles. You have the Dodgers, you have the Angels, you have two NFL. The NFL season isn't in season right now. But the LA Lakers, the NBA has been shut down, the LA Clippers. This is going to be a major hit to the Los Angeles economy. And we're also seeing Illinois and Ohio at the state level are pushing similar measures. So what do we do with this? Boy, I think people are afraid, and I understand it. If you are in government right now and you stand against a regulation like this, you are going to see a lot of backlash in November. Let me say that. I think politically,
we have elections in November. We are delaying elections here in Arizona. The primaries are being postponed. The primaries, I believe, are postponed in Ohio. So
I know. I think the presidential preference election is going to go on tomorrow in Arizona.
Last I heard, it was not. So I'll have. Unfortunately, I don't have the article in front of me, but I know Ohio. They were talking about pushing theirs. There's definitely. It happened in Georgia, I believe. Georgia did push back their elections. That already came to pass. So this is going to be a story also that's going to be involved with this, because how far do we go with this? Do we start delaying elections? Because it's happening. It is happening. Like I said, I heard Georgia, and Ohio, and so how far do you let this stuff go? And that's the question. How I've said this before on the show, is people, when their security is threatened, they will give their freedoms away. That's an old saying, and there's a lot of truth to it. And I go back to it. Who are we really as a people and as a nation? Are we a nation of laws, or are we a nation of fear? Or are we a nation that's going to hide under our beds just because people don't do what we want? You have every option as an individual to quarantine. You have an option to stay away from people, and nobody is really going to mess with that. So, and I question, the not only the legality of this, but I question the practicality of it. And you can see it with the little enforcement provision, at the bottom here. Each individual officer should use their discretion. Well, officers always use discretion. Okay, they always try to use discretion in their enforcement.
Right. Well, that's window dressing. That doesn't really change the meaning of this order, as you said. They always exercise discretion, but that's just to emphasize if anybody has a criticism, they can point to it and say, well, it's not going to be quite that draconian. They're going to take it on a case-by-case basis and use their best judgment, and we need to support them in this difficult time. Whether or not this
what this also comes to is we have a right under the Constitution. We have freedom of assembly. Now, I want to take this kind of one by one. Now, when we come to bars are heavily regulated. Okay, they are very heavily regulated in virtually every state. I mean, there are also counties where you can't have bars. There are dry counties to this day in this country. So bars are very, very heavily regulated, and but they are usually regulated at the state level. I would also note that they're usually regulated at the state level. Most
I don't know about that. If you
bar
go to
licenses,
Texas, okay, but if you go to Texas, yeah,
it's dual. It's dual. It's dual. Okay, so you have not every state. I can't speak for every state, but in most states, for instance, you have a state liquor board. And then you might also have a specific business license for liquor within the city, because cities issue business licenses as well.
Right.
Now, there is some play with that. Okay, so there is some play with these business licenses because liquor is heavily regulated. Okay, whether you believe it should be or not, it is. That's the way, and it's been that way since the Constitution was implemented, because we were taxing liquor from the very beginning. So liquor's always been very heavily regulated. So I understand there's a lot of play here. Okay, there's a lot of play here. So they may have the authority to go ahead and say, hey, you know what? You don't do this, we take away your liquor license. You can't operate anymore. I'm fine with that.
And if you have a charter city, that charter kind of creates like a little corporation. And so long as they obey the rules that they have set up, I don't think the state of California has very much say about whether or not Los Angeles does this. I think he probably does absolutely have this power. Whether or not it's being used wisely is a different question, but I don't.
And that's part of it too.
Challenged in court. Yeah,
that's part of it too. The practicality, and are you doing more harm than good? That's another question that has to be asked, and we're not going to know the answer to that question until well after this entire crisis has passed over.
Right.
But that's always a valid question, and those questions should be asked when these things are happening. They shouldn't just be asked in the back mirror of history. You know what I mean? We talked on an earlier show about the internment of the Japanese, and a lot of people should have been asking more questions about that when it was happening. And very few people in government were. Ironically, by the way, I have always heard that the one person in government who was questioning it was J. Edgar Hoover. Ironically, he was the one person telling Roosevelt this was unnecessary. My G-men can take care of this. You know what I mean? So don't worry about it. But that's a black mark on our republic for all of history. It's a black mark on our republic. Now here we go.
Here, of course, is are you endangering others by going into social situations where you could contract the virus? I think if you're trying to look at this from a liberty perspective, that's where you have to. I don't usually like to look at things as balancing acts, but in this case, where you do have a reasonable idea that a lot of people could be in danger, I think that's the argument you would make in court.
Yeah, that's the argument they're going to make, but that doesn't mean that they have the authority to do this. I mean, it's the question. It's the question. I'm not offering you an answer right now. I'm not. I'm asking questions, and I think that's what journalists are supposed to do. I think that's what responsible commentators do. You ask questions. and you ask difficult questions, and you try to get the answers to those questions. Right now, we don't have anybody to ask. We can't sit here with the mayor and ask him these questions, or sit there with one of the city councilmen and ask them how they feel about this. But I want to point out, as I pointed out earlier, these are based on the CDC guidelines, and the CDC guidelines do not have the weight of law. They just don't. It's just not there. The CDC is issuing guidelines, and the cities, individual cities, states are taking these guidelines and then trying to make them into law. They're trying to make them into law. And I don't understand exactly the methodology by which they feel they can do this. And here's the other thing. My segment is, I don't want to go too long with my segment. So I'm going to just leave you with this. And you can comment, Peter, but I'm going to kind of leave you with this thought, okay? There is the doctrine of unintended consequences. I talk about it a lot in my own political philosophy, called the doctrine of unintended consequences. You pass a law and you think it's going to do this, not realizing it's actually going to do that. And it actually creates more problems than it solves. There are already reports that I've seen of the yellow vest protests continuing in France, despite all the lockdown there, because they essentially have martial law in France right now. Essentially, they have martial law. This is, in a sense, martial law. That is the bottom line. And so you have to understand what is martial law? How does it work under the Constitution? Do states have more latitude than, say, the federal government? I would say they do. I would say that they do. And I would say that cities obviously derive their authority from the state. As you mentioned, they're chartered by the state, therefore they derive their constitutional authority under the state. I do think they have additional leeway, but we have fundamental rights in this country, such as freedom of assembly and freedom of religion. And I do want to just mention the religious provision, because he decided not quite to go there. Because he does say, in addition, I hereby issue guidance to the leaders of the city's houses of worship and urge them in the strongest possible terms to limit gatherings on their premises and to explore and implement ways to practice their respective faiths while observing social distancing practices. So he's going short of saying, I'm going to ban churches, okay?
Right.
Let's not mince words. Let's not mince words.
Struck down in court.
What's that?
That would be struck down in court.
So, but freedom of assembly is right there in the same amendment, okay? Our freedom to assemble and freedom of religion, okay? Freedom of the press, okay? So I am not offering an answer here, okay? I'm offering questions. And I'm asking people, where do your loyalties really lie? Do we believe in things like live free or die? Do we believe freedom isn't free? Are we willing to sacrifice for these things? And also, I want to also point out, I'm not saying that these are bad ideas. I'm not trying to, that's another thing that sometimes people don't understand with liberty. I'm not trying to advocate for you going to a movie theater right now. I'm not trying to advocate for you to go to a nightclub right now. I am not advocating for you to go to a bar right now. I think those are probably stupid things to do, okay? I agree with this idea of social distancing, washing your hands. I wish there were more masks, because the fact of the matter is they would help for people that are infected, but either are not sick yet or will never become sick, because we know that happens. They would help, and the mask hoarders. I mean, I'm almost at the point where I say we should hang them. But what I'm trying to say here is we have to ask questions. We have to ask questions. We can't just blindly follow all this stuff in terms of the authority of law. We can follow whatever guidelines you want as blindly as you want. If they tell you to jump off a bridge, you can go and do it if that's what you want to do. The question is, do you have to force everybody else to do it? That's the question.
Right. Now, last week I asked you what your perfect solution would be, and you mentioned something about federal guidelines, and the CDC has issued guidelines, and now the city of Los Angeles has put that into effect as a city ordinance. Were you talking about different guidelines? You were talking about guidelines for first responders. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what the context when we were talking last week about it. But yeah, I do. Actually, that was one of my concerns. It's still one of my concerns is the guidelines for first responders and healthcare workers. And the funny thing is, we keep hearing healthcare workers, healthcare workers, healthcare workers. And it's like, well, that's public safety too. Okay, that's part of the mix here, especially when you're talking about enforcing quarantines and enforcing social distances. You need the police. Real quickly, I
Mhm.
just wanted to, I want to get more into this because I think it's important to share sources, because sometimes what happens is people will just kind of talk out their butt, and they don't actually tell you where they're getting some of their information. So I just wanted to share this real quick. Dr. John Campbell is I believe, a British nurse PhD. So he's a nurse teacher, and also, as I understand, a practicing nurse. And he was ahead of this issue from the beginning, where he was talking about this issue all the way back in January and trying to warn people. I guarantee you, a lot of things I'm saying, Dr. John Campbell would not agree with, and I think that helps my credibility rather than hurts it, because there are things that he's advocating that are, in his words, draconian. But what's really good about Dr. Campbell is he provides a lot of statistics and kind of gives you a really good perspective of where we're at right now. And if you look at his past videos, you can see where we've been, how this progressed. And he's one of the few people that was talking about this issue all the way back in January. So I use him a lot when I'm trying to look at some of the patterns and how big is this threat, and what are the issues. One of the big issues, for instance, is testing. And quite frankly, we were behind the curve on testing, and right now testing really isn't that relevant, because once you have community spread, testing is really not that relevant. Right now, what the CDC is telling you is, if you have a cough, you have a fever, and we're talking about a dry cough and a fever, stay home. Don't go to the hospital. Unless you have difficulty breathing, don't go to the hospital. You're just going to get everybody else infected. So we're past that point where testing would have been, widespread testing would have been more helpful, because now it's basically, we have community spread. We know we have community spread. So it's time to lock down. And again, I'm not trying to say don't do it. I'm asking the question of the context within the rule of law, and if the things we're doing are going to actually work. And I'll make this prediction: depending on how long this goes, you will start to see people have home bars. You will start seeing people have Corona parties in their homes. People will get restless. People will do these things, and they will do it in a far less regulated manner than if we put some regulations at the bars, if we had some screening going on, because then you at least have a little bit of control, and then you're going to lose all control. That's my prediction, depending on how long this goes.
Okay. Well, there's another danger. If we could bring it up on the screen, this is something that we weren't planning on talking about until today. And you can see that, yeah, that scary looking article from the Electronic Frontier Foundation. If you know them, they are a very credible organization when they talk about your internet freedom. I don't know if you follow them, Eric, but the Earn Act is truly a frightening act. And it's being pushed by some of our favorite people, Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal. Uh, yeah, Republican of South Carolina,
Hey,
Democrat of
by
Connecticut.
the way, I did see that Lindsey Graham tested negative for Corona, and I did like that post in the name of Liberty Starship. I did do that on our account. I did like it.
Well,
So I do
yeah,
not
that was
wish Corona on anybody. I do not wish Corona on anybody.
All joking aside, there's a lot of concern right now about Washington. The president was near some corona positive people, and I guess he tested negative as well. So um, so far, it seems to be contained in Washington D.C. As
Oh,
far
but I forgot to mention this, but this is relevant. My congressman, Congressman Schweiker, his office is closed because one of his staff
Mm,
members tested positive.
I heard. So this bill, though, is not about corona. It is about freedom of speech. Now, do you recall the whole debate with Josh Hawley and Section 230 of the DMCA, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act?
I,
Basically, if you okay, what's that?
no, go ahead, Peter.
Okay, so Section 2 is what protects you if you own a website like Facebook or Google, or it could be any. If you own, say, or something where people produce their own content, right? If you're on Twitter, Periscope, responsible for what people post on your website because you don't censor it. there's nobody at Facebook who's watching what you post on Facebook before you post it. Maybe gauge at your post. They don't have enough staff at each and everything. You can't watch each and every video. It's just not possible. So Section 230 protects publishers by saying it's not like in the old days when you published a newspaper in the paper printing days. Now hardly anybody reads a paper newspaper. In the paper newspaper days, um, everything that was in that newspaper was read by the editor, hopefully, and you're not going to see something that protected illegal content. Can have Facebook. You on Facebook and before it's already out there. It's Pandora's boxes have been opened. So Section 30 protects Facebook, it protects Google, it protects forwarding, allows you to publish your own articles. Blogger.com, Twitter, many Instagram, Snapchat, they're all protected by Section 230. But with the Act says you have to earn that protection. How do you earn that protection? Well, I'm glad you asked. You have to follow certain guidelines. They're just guidelines. You're not required to do it, but if you follow you lose your protection. And so these things like not too much encryption. And I thought, well, it sounded the way this was, and I read this article on the EFF, and you can see it looks kind of alarmist. It's in black, and this looks kind of like a George Orwell style eagle there, where he's breaking the key, he's breaking the microphone, representing that they're breaking encryption, they're breaking freedom of speech. It seemed a bit over the top. But then I started to look at other sources, and everybody seems to be in agreement of exactly what it is. IT world, the same thing. Attorney General Barr wants to use this. The carrot is you get to use Section 230, and the stick is it's taken away if you don't weaken encryption. So if you own a service like WhatsApp, for example, that's supposed to be end-to-end encryption, or you have Telegram, or there's a lot of communication apps right now that are supposed to be secure. Now think about this in the context of China. Imagine if China does do this. They don't want you to have illegal apps, right? Yeah, in the Uyghur part of the country, in Xinjiang, I believe is the name of the far western province of China where you have all the Uyghurs. The police are stopping people on the street to make sure they don't have illegal apps on their phone. And these apps are apps that encrypt communications. They want people to be able to communicate freely, privately, one to another. And so what you have to ask, what kind of company is going to want to give up 30 protection? Because if you have a secret communication, somebody, let's say you have two terrorists talking to each other, right? Or two criminals talking to each other, or somebody is spreading child pornography, or as they put it, child sexual abuse material is specifically what they mention. Well, they take away your Section 230 protection, so you're not responsible for people communicating bad things over your network. Now imagine if we could sue AT&T if two criminals called each other on the phone. That's how crazy this is. Absolutely insane. I don't think.
I assume this is being done under the guise of this. We need this to fight terrorism. Is that
Right.
the angle that we're taking here?
Yeah, terrorism is part of the primary thing they're using is child exploitation, and that's how these things work.
So we're talking about human trafficking, things like that.
Yeah, human trafficking. They said, like I said, child sexual abuse material. So I suppose that includes child pornography as well. It's not exactly clear to me what is covered, but it's broad enough that it could cover, yes, terrorism, and that's primarily what the goal is here. They don't want terrorists or other people who are not friendly to the government, I suppose, able to communicate secretly. Now, if you recall, the Trump campaign had their lines tapped during the election. Technically, it wasn't a tap, right? They didn't have a physical bug. They listened in on their conversations, use a physical wiretap. So that's somehow an important distinction. If through, all of our devices are going to be tapped by the government. And let me tell you, if they're tapped by the government, they're going to be tapped by cyber criminals. Because encryption works if it works for how encryption works. There's no such secret backdoor. You put backdoors into software, backdoors into websites. Everything you say is now open to the. And we saw with the Vault 7, WikiLeaks revealed something called Vault 7 a couple of years ago. And it was a list of exploits the NSA had discovered. And basically what they found was the NSA had found all kinds of exploits to get into your iPhone, to get into your iPhone, to get into your computer, to get into anything they want to get in. But this goes a step further, because it says if there's something that they can't get into, well, they're going to go in with the force of law. They're going to use this carrot and stick approach. They're going to say you only have freedom of speech. You only have the ability to run your website, to run your business free of prosecution for other people's actions if you play ball, if you let the government in to read all of your customers' data. And that's really, to me, that's terrifying. We were going to talk about FISA reform, and that's kind of related. The FISA bill did pass the House. It'll be going to the Senate, and it's the same thing, that your business records, that's called, you may have heard of the third-party doctrine, which is that the government can get records from, say, AT&T to see what you were doing. That's still allowed under the current draft of the law for the so-called FISA reform. But that's exactly what happened to Trump. And Senators Mike Lee and Rand Paul have been talking to President Trump, saying he should veto this bill because it is dangerous. It's exactly what was done to him by the so-called deep state. Whether or not you like that word, you had people in the government who didn't like Donald Trump, who were spying on his campaign. They claimed it was for a good reason. They claimed it had to do with law enforcement. But if they did it for a good reason, without permission, they could do it for a bad reason. Okay? And we don't have to sit here and argue and prove that their reasons were bad. The fact is, if you can do it for a good reason, you can do it for a bad reason. If you can do it to bad people, you can do it to good people. It will happen. They start with the bad people. They start going after the so-called child abusers, which this law claims to be against. Now, look, if there are people who are trafficking children, should your website cooperate with the government? Absolutely. Absolutely. And generally speaking, people are happy to do so. Facebook isn't going to deny a federal subpoena. They're not going to just shove to the side. If the federal government asks for assistance for an investigation, they will get that assistance from Facebook. Okay, they will get it from Google.
I think that's a really good point. The fact of the matter is, if you do have a warrant, these companies are going to have to comply, and if they don't, there will be consequences to their failure to comply. They'll be in violation of the law, and people will be arrested, or should be arrested at that point. You know what I mean? You can't not comply with a warrant. That's just not an option. You don't have that right. Once a warrant is issued, you have to comply with it. And if they're not going to comply, they're not going to give the information, then the remedy is already there. But I want to back up, because Section 230 is something that's relevant for anybody, any content creator, anybody that's on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, anything. But it's been a huge issue on YouTube. It's been a huge issue on YouTube. I do a pop culture show in addition to this show, and on my pop culture show, we've been talking about COPPA and Section 230 for quite a bit. The funny thing is, there was a whole huge thing about COPPA on YouTube, and for weeks, months, everybody. I remember the Lego builder community was really concerned, really scared of COPPA and the regulations that YouTube was doing. As you may or may not be aware, you have to, when you set up a YouTube now, you have to declare whether this is child content or not. And if your child content, you have all sorts of restrictions. You lose your ability to have comments on your page. You can no longer do notifications for your page. You lose all sorts of restrictions, and you lose the targeted ads, which is the heart of COPPA, is the targeted ads, and Google's violation of COPPA because they were targeting ads at people they knew were minors. They knew were under the age of 13. COPPA applies to people only under the age of 13. So I've talked extensively about this actually on my pop culture show. But the interesting thing is, I'm one of the few people that was talking about Section 230. And people don't talk about Section 230 all that much. And Section 230 is very interesting, and very, very interesting. And Section 230, in my opinion, is being abused by many of the large big tech companies, including Google. I think what they did to content creators with making you decide whether your child content and putting it on you, and basically the FCC saying, hey, if you as a content creator violate the rules, we're going to fine you up to $40,000. And I think that was very heavy-handed, and I think it's wrong because the violation came from Google, not from content creators. You and me as a content creator, we have a YouTube channel. You and I cannot determine what kind of ads they put on our channel. We don't have that ability. We do not have that ability. We do not decide, unless you and I decide to have an in-show sponsor where we say, Liberty Starship is brought to you by blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Or we do some sort of product placement, or something like that. But you and I do not control. But that's not a targeted ad either. That's a dumb ad. Right. That's not a targeted ad. If we do something like that, that's not a targeted ad. Only Google has the ability to target ads on their platform. So I have a lot of mixed emotions when it comes to Section 230, because I do feel the companies are abusing the intent of 230 and, in fact, actually curtailing free speech when Section 230 is actually supposed to help free speech. Because the distinction between being a publisher and a platform is very significant when it comes to, specifically when it comes to civil law and you being sued for content that you're putting out. So, for instance, I was talking to you about Dr. Campbell earlier. If Dr. Campbell gives some quote-unquote bad medical advice, or medical advice that is beyond his level, because he's a nurse, he's not a doctor, he's not an MD. He's a doctor, but he's a doctor nurse and a PhD. If he goes on YouTube and gives bad medical advice, he can be sued for that. Section 230 is supposed to protect YouTube so they don't get sued, right? But what happens is YouTube might go ahead and say, for instance, well, we don't like this guy giving free advice. Let's just get rid of him because we have people that are doing it for pay and we don't want them to be around. He's competing with them, so let's just get rid of him. And I think, unfortunately, that's what's happening sometimes with Section 230. So I have mixed emotions when it comes to Section 230, and I think we could actually do an entire show just on Section 230.
Sure, we absolutely could. I wanted to share this other article from Wired magazine. Wired has a reputation for being a left of center publication these days. It's more progressive. They pointed out that this is a bipartisan effort. Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, they're going after encryption. And just like the FISA vote earlier today, when you had some Democrats, civil libertarians like Zoe Lofgren supporting real reform, you have both Democrats and Republicans supporting this terrible bill, and it is about encryption. Now let's talk about how encryption actually works. I think a lot of people don't really know how encryption works in the real world. For encryption to be effective, I have to have the key, right? If you want to send me something, you use my public key, you send it to me, so you encrypt it, and I decrypt it, but I'm the only person who can decrypt it. If there is anybody else who has the key to decrypt the content that you're sending to me, then my content is not secure. If anybody else has that key, if Facebook has that key, if Google has that key, then everybody, I just said it and my phone came to life. So they are listening to us, our devices. But if anybody else has that key, the government will have that key. Hackers will have that key. So if you are using an app like, say, WhatsApp, you're using Facebook said that they wanted to have a new end-to-end encrypted system, and there's a one new one called Telegram that's popular. Snapchat, I believe, is supposed to be encrypted end-to-end. The problem is, do you ever recall generating your own key for those apps? You didn't, right? So who has that key? Where is that key? Well, it's on your phone, presumably, or it could be on the server of Snapchat. Hopefully, it's on your phone. But even so, if it's on your phone and it's accessible by the app, well, guess what? Snapchat has access to your private key. They can unencrypt anything they want to, which means that if the government really wants to get a warrant, they can come in. They can they can decrypt these messages. Maybe they can't get messages that are already sent that have been encrypted, and the key's been through. There are different ways to do that, right? To have security that can't be later decrypted. But for the most part, your devices are not secure. I think people need to realize that. The only way to get true security is, well, just get smarter about how encryption works. If you're going to send emails, use something like Pretty Good Privacy. But right now, most people they don't have the time, they don't have the technology. We are all so vulnerable, and this law makes us even more vulnerable. It's not necessary. It's absolutely ridiculous. I expect it will pass with bipartisan support. There's going to be some Democrats who oppose it. A lot of Democrats will oppose it. A lot of Republicans who will oppose it. But I think you're going to see more people in each party support this bill, and that's just really unfortunate.
Yeah, it definitely is. I understand some of the intent, but I also think sometimes the stated intent is not necessarily what the real intent is. So
I don't give them that. I don't give them that much credit, and I'll tell you why. When the Patriot Act was first signed into law, those provisions had already been written. They had already been drafted years before. These were things that had been included in other bills at other times, and they weren't able to get them through because Congress said, no, this is wrong. We don't support this. And what happened when there was an emergency? They passed the bill anyway. They used it to pass a bunch of bad ideas into law. And so these are ideas that that William Barr has already had cooking. He already wanted these things to happen. And so they have been thinking, how do we push this law for people's hot button issues? You can't use coronavirus. So, child exploitation, which is terrible. It is a terrible thing that we need to deal with as a society. But I gotta say, this is absolutely the wrong way to go about it. This is absolutely the wrong way. We have protections. We have the Fourth Amendment for a reason. It has served us well. There's no reason not to get a warrant. But I don't have a lot of hope because I think the big problem is going to be not enough voters are going to understand this issue. Not enough voters are going to be motivated by this issue, even if you understand it, even if you think this is a bad idea. Is this the issue that's going to decide your vote? And if it is, whom do you vote for? Because if both Republicans and Democrats support this, you don't have a choice in November. You have the two parties that both support this bad bill that is against your civil liberties. So, not much of a high note to end on, but I'm not optimistic. I'm just
it's bipartisanship. Aren't we supposed to be advocating for bipartisanship? I always think that's silly too, by the way, because I think it's funny because it always seems that, people don't realize how much bipartisanship there actually is, especially on important issues like this. But hey, it's bipartisan. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Well, we're now at about an hour and 9 minutes. I think it's time we wrapped it up. Like I said, we didn't exactly.
I do think we have to address one thing. We have it there subtly, but people may have noticed we have a new logo, and I think we should let people take a closer look at it. There it is in all of its glory. I think it came out very well. That is the Liberty Starship right there. Very cool. I want to give credit where credit is due. Peter designed that, and then we had some actual I believe a graphic designer go ahead and finish it for us. But that is Peter's basic design, and I think he did a great job. I'm very pleased with it, and hopefully you're going to be seeing this logo a lot. You're going to see it all over the place.
Yeah, sure. T-shirts, frisbees, car stickers. Why not?
Exactly, and people are going to love it. I think I might wait, since I haven't revealed my face yet. I think I might wait till we have our Liberty Starship ball caps, and then I'll go ahead and reveal my face. I'll go ahead and be on the air.
I thought you were going to do a facial tattoo, but that's cool too.
I think I'll stick with the ball cap. So
okay, great. Yeah. By the way, that is you in your picture with Ron Paul.
That's right. That actually is but I don't really. I have long hair. I've got a mustache, so I don't really look exactly like this anymore. But yeah, that is actually me standing next to Ron Paul. So I have revealed my face, just not exactly the way it looks right now. So
very cool. All right. Well, that's all we have for today. I'm Pete. This is Eric, and you keep flying free.